Doesn't matter who you are. If you look at anybody you look up to, like for the people that I look up to in business and sales and all these different industries, look at their story. Like really, understand the journey they went through, and you'll see that common theme time and time again with all these successful people is that they had to.
How do you get the yes when you're coming up against, I'll think about it, or no?
Overcoming objections really comes down to, for someone new in sales and trying to understand what working the pipeline is, it's really like, okay, going from fear to faith, to have that trust, to make a purchasing decision, it really comes down to like you understanding.
PhoneSales.com.
The Barbadian man himself, the sales assassin, crushing the sales game with phone sales. What is good, Omar? What's going on, and how is life?
What's up, Max?
I'm good.
Life's great, brother. How about you, man?
Life is good. Life is good. Let's really dive into the sales game. You're an expert sales. You're an expert sales assassin. I see it. I've seen some of your calls, and I see how you train people as well, which is something that I find very fascinating. You seem like a very good trainer of people. That's just my personal opinion.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I appreciate it.
That's it, man. But in like the sales game, how do you find work-life balance? Because you've specifically just moved as well, haven't you? You've just moved. Mm-hmm. You're with your girl. Everything's probably all up in the air. How have you found it possible to, one, run an agency, run a relationship, and run a house, all of the above, and buy a house at the same time?
That's a great question, man. Like work-life balance, it's one of those things where like, it's never really a complete balance. It's just really kind of just prioritizing your life, right? Just like setting up parameters around whatever makes most sense for you, right? So what makes most sense for me is like having a segment of my day just dedicated to work and sales. And then when I'm done that day, I'm done that day. It's not, of course, I'm still available for, for my team if they ever need anything. But it's like, okay, when you got that time that you're finished work, it's like, okay, cool. Go do everything else you got to do, including spend time with my girl and everything else like that. Right. So, I find one thing with sales guys is, because you have that flexibility of, working for yourself, a lot of the time it's like, okay, during your work time, it's kind of like, okay, I'm working for this hour, then I'm kind of like doing something else, kind of fooling around for this hour, maybe going to the gym in the middle of my day. I find it's like, okay, if I'm dedicating 6-7 hours towards my work day, boom, I'm banging that out. And that's all I'm focused on during that time.
Okay. So in those 6-7 hours that you're dedicated to your work, like how do you manage to keep up those tasks? How do you manage to get that 6 hours dedicated without like getting distracted, let's say?
Yeah, man. So I think it starts with like, having a schedule, like having, an organized schedule, right? Like, I think the biggest thing is knowing that, okay, if you're going to say this is the time you're dedicating to work, then fill your day with as much money-making activities as possible, right? And so for me, even some of those money-making activities in between sales calls, in between meetings, is me even consuming some content, right? Just to keep me in the zone while I'm in my workday, right? Because, it's easy where it's like, okay, maybe you have a bad call, maybe you're having a long day, maybe you got other things going on in your personal life that may distract you during your designated workday. But I find like having, different trainings, different people that I look up to in my ear in between, my work day when I have some free time, that helps keep me in the zone so that when I do get back into a real focused task, I'm still in the zone. I haven't stepped out of it, did something else, and then got to warm myself back up or get focused again. Right. So that's one thing that I've always done is, consume podcasts, listen to some books, watch some YouTube videos, but real focused, education, to keep me in the zone in between my workday.
Right. And if anyone watching this wants to get some good podcasts, you better watch the Phone Sales podcast.
Yeah, absolutely.
So money-making activities, what would you consider a money-making activity, specifically running an agency?
Yeah, I would consider, being on sales calls, of course, is a money-making activity. Doing training with your guys is a money-making activity, right? Because obviously the more you can pour into your team, the more you're going to increase the chances of them being able to show up in everything they're doing and perform at the highest level, right? So that's considered a money-making activity. So training your team, training yourself, being on a sales call, but also being in a position where you're doing follow-up, you're getting your week more organized, right? Like these are all things that I consider money-making activities because they all have a direct impact some of them a little less direct, but they still are connected to having an impact on your ability to make more money.
Of
So
course.
even like training your guys, for example, you may not in the moment have a direct effect on, okay, you train your guys on something and then you're making more money. It's like that's not how it works. But it's like you going into that with the mindset of like, the more I pour into these guys, the more it's going to allow them to have confidence on their calls, the more it's going to have allow them to have better structure with overcoming objections, better
Of course.
preparation going into their calls, which
Of
is going
course.
to translate into more closes, more money being made, more money coming back into your pocket, right? So those are all, examples of money making activities where it's like, okay, my workday should be filled with as many of these as possible because they, in
Right.
some way, shape, or form, directly connect back to me and my team making more money.
Got you. Got you. Got you. Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
So it's the so when you look for a money making activity, it's not the short term, it's actually the long term of the benefit that what you're doing can progressively make money, or is there like a short term money making activity
Yeah.
versus long term? Like, how would you explain that?
Great question. Yeah, short. It's both, man. So short term and long term money making activities, right? So the long term would be like what I was just describing, right? Like training your guys, right? That's more of like to even in some cases it's a short term as well with that because there's so many times where we do trainings and then my guys tell me like, Omar, just use what we talked about on my next call. Boom, work like a charm. Got a
Right.
deal, right? So of course, so you have the short term effect when a training on the training side of things, but it also plays into the long term as well, right? But a
Makes
lot
sense.
more direct short-term money making activities is doing sales calls, hitting up follow-up, right, calling no shows, also working your pipeline. These are all immediate short-term money making activities as
Makes
well.
sense. Okay.
Yeah.
So then what would you consider like a task that is actually wasted time, like to go the complete flip side of that, like
Yeah.
what is actually
Yeah.
wasting time, like for you and also for like a sales guy as well?
Yeah. I would consider something being a waste of time during your workday would be like, okay, you've dedicated yourself to be like, okay, you know what? I'm going to take sales calls. I'm going to work my workday between, 10 a.m. to 6, just as an example, right? And it's like, okay, you got 5 calls booked in, you have a couple no show. And then rather than using that no show time productively, you kind of just, I don't want to swear, but you kind of just, fluff off, right? Like
Of
you
course.
just, hang out. You're like, oh, okay. Or, I got a no show. Let me just chill for an hour. And it's like, okay, of course, like if you're having a crazy busy day, maybe sometimes you need a little bit of a break in between calls.
Mm,
But, I consider wasted time using that time that could have, that, originally was dedicated towards a sales call. It turns into a no show. And then you just use that time for nothing, right? Instead
got
of
you.
looking at how you can work your pipeline, instead of looking at how you can check your calls for later on today and maybe move
Right.
somebody earlier to talk to you, right? How you can potentially look at somebody that no showed last week and try to get them back on the phone, right? Or book an appointment for yourself. There's so many different things you do that you can do with that time instead of just looking at it like, oh, it's a no show. I got a free hour. Let me
Yes,
just chill
exactly.
until, or let me just watch TV until, my next appointment, right? So
Right. Okay,
yeah,
I've
yeah, yeah.
actually been guilty of that in the past. If a no show ever, like whenever I had a call booked in with my past business, if a no show ever happened, I'd be like, "Oh, cool, that's 3 hour."
Yeah.
So I've got to hold my hands up.
I've been there too. No,
Of
I hear you,
course,
bro.
of course.
I've been guilty of it as well in the past, man. But it's something that as you continue to grow in this game, in this industry, you realize the importance of that time.
Of
You
course.
realize, like, and right, especially when you're busy, right? Like you realize, okay, that hour here, that could have been used to get me X amount more calls. That could have been used to
Right.
make my life easier in the future, as
Of
opposed to
course.
just chilling, right? Just letting time go by,
Exactly.
right? So,
Exactly. That's funny, man. That's interesting. So then,
yeah.
someone who is in that space where they're new in the sales game,
Hmm.
what would you recommend that they start doing? Like, like you said, so like if there's a no show, for example, what do you
Hmm.
recommend they can start doing to work the pipeline? Like, what does that mean for someone who doesn't actually know what working the
Yeah.
pipeline is?
Yeah. So for someone new in sales and trying to understand what working the pipeline is, it's really like, okay, at some point as you start taking calls, you're going to have a pipeline, meaning people that you've spoken to, that you've done calls with, who either, who most likely didn't buy because they're in your pipeline, right? They wouldn't be in your pipeline if they bought. So,
Of course.
you're looking at, hey, I talked to X amount of people. They told me they're gonna, they need X amount more time. Let me send them a message. Let me give them a phone call. So and so ghosted me. Let me try to hit them up. Right. Let me send this person a training because we spoke last week and they were a little bit on the fence about X, Y, and Z. Let me send them a training
Hmm.
on X, Y, and Z to kind of move them along the sales cycle. Right. So
Right.
for people who are in sales, even if you're new, once you start to build up some sales calls that you haven't closed, you're building a pipeline. For people who are new to sales that maybe you haven't taken any calls in your new offer yet, working the pipeline could be you going into your company's demo completed not closed list, because most companies, if you're starting in a company, they're going to most likely have a list of leads that were from previous closers or current closers that didn't close,
Ah,
that are
okay.
just, yeah, right. So even as a new person, and that's one thing that really can increase your stock with the companies that you work with,
Of
right? You
course.
coming in there as a closer and not just being the guy who's like, okay, I'm waiting for calls. My schedule's open. Just pack me full of calls in my calendar,
Yes.
right? Like, yeah, the high ticket space, got a lot of companies that do that for you, which is cool. But like, if you really want to take yourself to the next level and get to that 1%, in top performers, things like that help separate you from
Of
everyone else, and
course.
also make it much easier for you to start making money much
Of course.
faster. And they also develop your sales skills and your sales habits in so much better of a so much in so much more of an effective way when you
Interesting.
think like that, rather than just waiting to have stuff given to you. So that would be
Interesting.
my advice to new closers who may not have their own pipeline built out yet. Use the pipeline that's already there
Yeah.
for your company, and I guarantee the business owner, the offer owner, they're gonna love that you're
Of
down to
course.
go work that pipeline.
Of course. That's
Yeah.
like, so that's actually reminds me of what Sasha said to me. He said that's how he originally got into the sales stuff, was
Hmm.
when all the unclosed deals, he said, let me try and close them. And he said literally the
Yes.
first one that he came across, they I think they told him to like F off and like put the phone down on him, and he just goes, okay, on to the next.
On to the
and,
next one,
and
right?
and like you said, that's being, in my opinion, that's being proactive rather than reactive.
Yes.
Do you know what I mean? And that's what someone is
100%.
looking for. Do you know what I mean? Like, that is why you are a phone sales like partner. Do you know what I mean? Because you clearly are
Hmm.
proactive rather than reactive. You're doing the stuff that needs to be done, but on top of being proactive, you can also be reactive to the good things that are coming your way as well, right?
Exactly.
That's it, man.
100%, man.
So, like I said, I see you as a very good trainer. I see you as like a very, like, personally, my opinion is like you're a very caring person.
Hmm.
You're also very intelligent, so you can care while teaching, but also be like tough at the same time. Be like, look, this is what needs to be done. Let's get it
Hmm.
done. But
Hmm.
I'm going to show you how we do it. And you sort of like that's the way that you come across when I've seen a lot of your videos.
Appreciate it, man.
How do
Yeah.
you
Thank you.
encourage your team to make it happen, even if they
Hmm.
don't know how to do something?
Yeah, man. Encouraging your team to make it happen, I think it really starts with you leading by example, right? Because this is one thing, like I've been in sales and some sort of coaching and leading others in sales and, in that field for almost 14, actually over 14 years now.
Okay,
And I could tell you, man, like one of the things I learned early, I got into it early. And when I was first in the game, I didn't have all the life experience. I didn't have all the sales experience. So like, okay, how did I, perform and make up for that lack of experience, right? And especially when I became a manager and started to lead people, a big part of it came down to like leading by example.
of
And because
course.
when you lead by example as a coach, as a leader, as a manager, whatever position you are where you're leading other people, you're responsible for other people, if you can show them that, hey, I'm willing to do what I'm asking of you and I'm going to go and get it done, you help eliminate the excuses that they can make up for themselves.
Right,
Because if they
right.
can see you do it, if they're seeing their manager, like we'll use the example of calling no shows, working the pipeline. And, in that example you just gave of Sasha, saying, hey, give me all the leads that haven't closed and I'm going to call them.
Mm,
Like if you can step forward and lead by example and do something that your team is like, oh, okay, I don't know how to do this, or, this is hard, but you show them how to do it with your actions rather than just being like, hey, go do this, go do that. Whenever you tell people to do something, they're always going to think to themselves, can you do this? Have you done it before?
of
Even if they're
course.
not consciously thinking it, like it may be a little voice in the back of their mind. But when you can step forward and actually show them, like, hey, I'm asking you to do this, but I wouldn't ask you to do anything that I wouldn't do myself or haven't done myself.
Yes.
And I always finding, man, like just stepping forward and leading by example is a great way to eliminate the excuses, but really fire the guys up. Because I know for me, coming up in the game, like every mentor that I've ever had, every mentor that I still have, when I see them in action, that gets me excited, man.
Of
When I
course.
see my mentors, my leaders, like doing a task, just being in the game, like, instead of being the coach on the sideline, taking off their suit and actually jumping in the game for a
Yeah,
little
yeah,
bit,
yeah. Of
that gets me excited because I'm like, yo, I want to be like that guy. I want to do it
course.
exactly how he's doing
Of
it. So
course.
it's a two-way street. When you're asking your team to do something, right? You're helping to eliminate excuses when you lead by example, but you're
Mm,
also inspiring them to be like, yo, I want to be as good as him. I want to do it as good as him, if not better. And
of
seeing
course.
you do it is a great way to shine that light. So
Of course.
that's what I would say.
No, that's awesome, man. And
Yeah.
that actually reminds me of like a thing that Mark Cuban said. He was literally talking about
Hmm.
that. He said I think when he bought was it the Mavericks he bought? I'm pretty sure.
Mavericks. Yeah.
When
Yeah.
he bought the Mavericks, he said he went into the office and he was calling up people saying, "You used to have a season ticket. Why have you not got a season ticket? Do you want a season ticket?" And they were like, "Why were you doing that? You literally just sold your companies for something like $1 billion or whatever. You just had all this money. Like, why were you doing that? You could have paid people." And
Hmm.
because I want to lead from the front and I want to show people how it's done. And if I'm not willing to do
100%.
it, why would they be willing to do it? And I was like,
Exactly.
that's it.
Come
That's
on
it.
now.
You've got that Mark Cuban billionaire mentality, Omar.
That's
so
appreciate that. Mark
so
Cuban's sick. Yes. Yeah.
let's actually go on from that and say,
Hmm.
okay, so let's say you are leading from the front
Hmm.
and you are the one that is showing people how to take the sales calls. You are the one that is coming up against these objections. How do
Hmm.
you get the yes when you're coming up against, I'll think about it or no? Like, how do you personally fight through those
Yeah.
objections to get the yes?
Yeah, man. Me personally, how I fight through objections, like there is so many great sales trainers, so many great sales people out there, right? Like I can tell you, I can go on forever talking to you about people like Jeremy Miner, Matt
Mhm,
Ryder, Cole Gordon, like people that I've invested in to learn from, people that I
mhm,
have a tremendous amount of respect from, a tremendous amount of respect for. I can go on about that, right? And there's amazing sales structures out there to teach you how to overcome objections and all those different things. But if I just had to simplify it, overcoming objections really comes down to just having a real conversation with people, because at
mm,
the end of the day, like people are on your phone call, they're in this meeting, in your sales call, wherever you're having your sales situation, they're there for a reason, right? Like they
mhm.
wouldn't have taken their time to show up if there wasn't a solution that they were seeking.
Right.
So when you get to the objection side of things, 9 times out of 10 objections are coming up because they're human, we're all human at the end of the day, right? So
Cool.
sometimes like natural emotions come up of like fear of like, oh damn, that's a lot of money, or like, oh
Mhm.
damn, like I've been this person for so long and now this person's trying to get me to make a change, and like it's their natural emotions, right? So the best thing to do, without getting into technical sales structure and all that stuff, is just have a real conversation with people and face whatever that thing is head on, instead
Right.
of allowing smoke screens or the surface level of what they're telling you is the reason why they're objecting. Actually bring up some of the things you learn on that call to really have a real conversation about, okay, like what is it that you're scared of, like what is it that's holding you back, like let's talk about that.
Got
Money
you.
aside, everything aside, let's talk about the thing that's actually coming up that's making you feel hesitant, that's making you feel
Mm,
scared, that's making you feel like you're not clear. There's something there that is coming up, so let's talk about that.
got you.
Right, that's one of the biggest things I would say, is just really having a deep conversation around what the actual issue is, and
Mhm.
as opposed to looking at it like, oh man, I got an objection, and like, here we go again, right? It's like, okay, yeah, here we go again, because they're human will have
Exactly.
human emotions, they're going to come
Exactly.
up, so have a conversation about it. So
So okay,
at a
so
high level, I would just say that. Yeah.
yeah, so when a lot of people go, oh, here we go again, like for
Yeah.
you, I'm assuming for an expert salesperson, I'm assuming that their immediate thought is, this is sales. Let's get into it.
Hmm.
Do you know what I mean? This
Yeah.
is this is where the transformation actually happens, because of course it's
Hmm.
like, I don't have the money. Okay. But you're saying that you're here in your business and you don't have the money. Like, let's take a business example.
Yeah.
You don't have the money in your business. So what you're telling me is, in a month from now, you're still not going to have the money in your business. In 2 months from
Hmm.
now, 3, 4, 5, 6 months from now, you're still not going to have the money in your business. So the fact that we're going to help you make money in your business, does that not tell you that is something you should do?
Exactly.
It's like just getting them to get over the edge. So
Yes.
when you say a real conversation, like,
Hmm.
What does that consist of? Like, because like what I've learned from all of you guys, from conversations with you, from watching your sales calls, what I've learned is that it really is just about understanding the person's needs and desires, where they are and where they
Hmm.
want to really go. Like that's, I suppose, the basics of it. But
Hmm.
how do you like explain a real conversation that gets to the transformation of a purchasing decision being a yes?
Yeah, great question. Like how I get to that real conversation is very similar to what you were saying. Is getting the person to realize like nothing's gonna change if nothing changes, right? And as simple as that sounds, it's true, right? Like in the example that you were using of someone struggling in their business, and maybe we're talking about them making a purchase that
Mm,
is geared around services that will help them to scale their business.
of course.
Then it's like, okay, you're in this position where you need to make a decision to get this solution so that you're not in this position 3 months from now, six
Hmm.
months from now, a
Hmm.
year from now, right? Because I can tell you, I've been in positions, Max, early in the game where I spent money on coaches, I spent money on personal development, and I had no business spending that money. I had no business
Feel you,
whatsoever.
bro.
Like,
I feel
right? You've been there too, right? Yeah.
I'm still
Like,
there.
okay, there we go. Okay. Right. So Max, I can tell you, I can go on and on about stories about, where I actually took out loans, maxed out my credit card, asked my parents for help financially. Like I went above and beyond to figure out how to find the money because I was so tired of being in the position that I
Mm,
was in. And I was so focused on getting this solution so I wouldn't be in this position ever again.
right. Right.
That's how you communicate. That's how you have these real conversations, is finding their version of that thing and helping to communicate that like in that situation of like
Hmm.
your business is struggling to make the kind of money that you want to make, to give you the kind of future that you want to have, to give you the kind of life that you want to have. Something's got to change, so a solution has to be taken advantage of for you to be in that position to make these changes. So
Right.
really and truly, if you're feeling scared, if you're feeling like, okay, I don't have enough money, whatever is coming up, think about who you would need to be to actually get to this goal that you're talking about.
Right.
And really, I like to ask people sometimes, it's like, okay, Max, if we look at the person who you were describing earlier, who's making, $100,000 a month in your business, you got free time, you got a team underneath you, you're living life. If that person was here with us right now,
Mm,
how would he be looking at this decision? Would he be saying to you, Max, oh, Max, you're scared. It's okay to be scared, man. Like, you'll figure it out. You'll get here. You'll get here eventually. Or would he say to you, like, Max, you had to make this decision to get to where we are today. Max,
of
you had
course.
to overcome your fear and focus more on your faith and focus more on being where I am today, the future version of yourself. You had to
Hmm.
focus on that rather than focusing on where you've been and where you are now. Like having those types of conversations with people, because I find it, a lot of the time it's just a shift in perspective
Of
people
course.
need during these real conversations, right? It's
Of
like
course.
really getting to the core of why they're thinking like that, helping them to evaluate, like, why do you think like that? Like when I was making those decisions to spend money, part of it was like, okay, I can keep this money in my account and like
Let it collect
be,
dust.
yeah, let it collect dust and like just be slightly less broke, right? Or I can be a little more broke, be connected to the people and the solutions that are actually going to
Mm,
change my circumstance so that
mm,
I don't have to be broke again moving forward, right?
of
So there's
course.
and that just comes with a shift in perspective, right? So that's what I would say, man, is really having those real conversations revolves around you going in with the intention to shift their perspective, to help them be
Right.
aligned with the person that they want to be, the person that
Makes
they
sense.
told you they want to be.
That makes sense. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's interesting because you talk about fear. You spoke about fear, and you're
Hmm.
talking about perspective shifting and stuff like that. Now, my past being a hypnotherapist, obviously, I worked with people with a lot of
Hmm.
fears. So, like, I understand that as well. But there's a lot of people that don't understand how to transfer fear to faith. Like, how
Hmm.
do you get someone who is petrified to make that purchasing decision to having complete faith, where they're like, "I trust in you, Omar, because
Hmm.
you're like what is it that gets to that point where they trust in you enough to make a
Yeah.
purchasing decision?"
Yeah, man. Going from fear to faith, and to have that trust to make a purchasing decision, I think it really comes down to like you understanding the person to begin with, right? And that's why it's so important to have a real conversation on these
Mm,
sales calls. And it's like, yeah, you may have a sales script, yeah, you may have a sales framework, but it's like that's just to guide you along, right? But like at the end of the day, move that to the side. There's a real person that you having a real conversation with. So
of
it starts
course.
with you actually learning, why did this person even show up to this call in the first place,
Right.
and what are the real things that they want to accomplish that really matter to them. So
Mm,
that once you actually understand that, now you can use that information to have a conversation back and forth and address that fear that they have right now and just
right.
really help them understand, right? And one question to even ask people is like, how is that fear serving you, right?
Mm,
Is
of course.
that fear, serving you to get to where you want to be? Because if it was, you'd already be there
Of
by
course.
now, right? Like exactly. So it's really like getting that person to ask them, to understand like how is that way of thinking serving you,
Mm,
and getting them to understand that anything in life that is worth having, there's going to be risk
of course.
associated
Of
with it.
course.
Anything whatsoever, right? So it's like, okay, this fear that you have is tied to what?
Mm,
A little bit of risk, some risk that's tied to it, but okay, what's on the other side of that risk? The reward that we've been speaking about over this last hour on the call. So
of course.
those, I think it's on two different ends of the spectrum. The faith is connected to who they can be, who they
Mhm.
want to be, and the future that they actually ultimately want to move towards. The
Right.
fear, the fear is tied to, what's comfortable, where they've been,
That's it.
ways of thinking that don't serve them, right?
Yeah.
And ultimately not tied to the future version of themselves. So it's like having a conversation of those two polar opposites and to be like, okay, like what direction do you want to go, right? Like it's really up to
Right.
you. Like
Yeah.
where do you want to move towards? You're either going
Of
to
course.
move towards this future version of yourself and act in faith and take that step in faith and take that step that involves risk, yes, but also has that reward attached to it. Or we can stay on that side of fear that is ultimately not serving you. And that's why you have the conversation
Of
of,
course.
hey,
Of course.
how is this serving you? If it is, which we know it's not, and then seeing that this is actually tied to you staying exactly where you are,
Mm,
which is where you don't want to be, which is why you are on this phone call in the first place,
of
right? So
course. Of course.
yeah, I would say that, Max, is just really like separate, because a lot of time people have them all mumble jumbled into one, right? Like, oh no, I want this, but I'm fearful, and it's like, no,
Of
they're
course.
two. Yeah, you got to break them
Right.
up. They're two
Ah,
separate
okay. So
ends of this.
you've got to make it clear as the sales, as the closer, to
Yeah.
really separate. I suppose it really is, because like what you said, it's perfect, because the reality is, to
Hmm.
be a good salesperson, you have to understand psychology to a base level. You don't need a degree in
Yes.
psychology, but you need to be able to understand human psychology. And what you said, it's like you're separating the past of, like, this is where you were, this is what you did, and I
Hmm.
suppose you're attaching the fear to the past, kind of like, yeah, no, if
Exactly.
you keep doing that, of course you're going to be fearful, of course you're going to, like, lose out, of course you're going to make the mistakes, of course you are. But
Hmm.
who's this person over here? Who's the future version of yourself? Like, where are you going? And it's like, I suppose it's
Yes.
like painting that picture so clearly, and that's really your job. Would you agree?
100%. I would totally
Awesome.
agree with that. Absolutely. And I would also throw in there too as well is like if you look at anybody that we look up to, doesn't matter who you are. If you look at anybody you look up to, like for the people that I look up to in business and sales and all these different industries, like and that's why it's so, it's so important to understand, as much as you have your mentors and all these different people, like look at their story, like really
Hmm.
understand the journey they went through, and you'll see that common theme time and time again with all these successful people is that they had to go through their own version of overcoming that fear and leaving
Right.
that way of thinking behind to
Yeah.
become the person who they are today that you look up to so
Hmm.
much.
Hmm.
So it's
Hmm.
like you as a prospect on the phone, you can't think that you're going to skip this formula that everyone's got to go through. We all got to go through the same formula.
I'm different.
Right?
I'm
So
different, Omar. I'm different.
exactly. No, you know different, Max. You're just like the rest of us, right? Right. So I think, and that's part of it too as well. Because I know for me, like reading autobiographies, you just learning from my mentors and just all the different people that helped me to become who I am. Like
Right.
seeing that has always been an exciting piece because like, oh, okay, man, like they just like me, man. They had their own version of that 10 years ago, 20 years ago. Like
That's it.
this is just my version of that I'm overcoming right now. So let's just do it so I can be on the other side of it, which
Mm-hmm.
is exactly where I want to be.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
See, that's super interesting, actually,
Hmm.
because whenever I did something before, like I say, I've got a lot more confidence in myself and a lot more like I can take a risk and not worry about the outcome. I'm like, if it goes wrong, it goes wrong, whatever. Like I'd rather do it and
Hmm.
it go wrong than not do it and think, but what if it went right? Do you know what I mean? Like that's always
Exactly.
my sort of opinion with it. Obviously within reason, like I don't take every opportunity that I get.
Yeah.
Um, but whenever I didn't have that confidence in myself, I would always ask like, what would, so, you know, like people say, what would Jesus do? Like stuff like that. What would
Hmm.
Tony Robbins do? Or what would,
Hmm.
like Alex Hormozy do? Like, what would these people do in this situation? And if the answer
Hmm.
is take the risk, or the answer is like just go for it. Like I remember I used to be petrified of public speaking, petrified, like an ingrained fear of mine.
Mm.
And I got the opportunity to public speak, and I was obviously petrified. And by the end of it, my friend said, he was like, I was nervous for you. You were that nervous. And I was like, yeah, I know, but you got to do it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And then eventually, like I've spoken in front of like hundreds of people now, and it all started with that one decision to say I'm going to talk in
Hmm.
front of 7 people to take a business meeting, and people were nervous for me because I was that nervous. But that's where
Hmm.
it started, and that's where it has to start for some people. Some people
Exactly.
just have to work harder. Some people are naturally more gifted in these areas. But that's super interesting,
I love that.
what you're saying about that fear and faith, because it really is about just attaching their future and bringing it back to
Hmm.
them, and making them realize that yes, the future's over there, it is over there,
Hmm.
but it's actually not as far as you think it is
Exactly.
if you take the right action.
That's it, man.
That's it,
That's
man.
absolutely it, man.
I,
I love hearing that story because it's like we all got our own little version
that's
of
it.
that moment, right?
That's it. Have you had
Which is
a moment like that before?
with public speaking. Let me see. Like, I think one of my first moment. You know, it's funny because like like I was telling you, my first moment becoming like a manager was like in the gym industry. Like I used to
Mhm.
work for a company called LA Fitness, and
Right.
started as a trainer, then moved into like more of like the sales side of things, and then
Got you.
eventually became like the VP of sales.
Oh,
And
wow.
I could tell you, yeah, like when I was a trainer, like even on the sales side of things, like that moment came from that moment of like being fearful started with like just having one-on-one conversations because as a trainer like and to sell yourself you're going through like a consultation
Mm.
and like even my first time trying to like communicate a script off the top of my head was like like you know what I mean like even that was like yeah it was a nervous moment because it's like I'm naturally or grew up naturally more of like an introvert, right? I was more of an extrovert around like my friends and people that I'm close with, right? But so even my first time in sales, like doing a sales pitch,
Mm.
sales presentation, having to communicate something that was a script was a nervous situation that I had to overcome, right? And then
I feel you, bro.
yeah.
That's
So
that's funny, man. No,
go
go
ahead,
ahead.
go ahead.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, yeah. So like that was like the first version of that, and then like as I, started to move up and then became a manager, that became okay. The next version of that is me like coaching my team, which was it was a small team at the time, like
Right.
only like 3 people, but it was like still like my first time in a sales meeting or a coaching meeting, coaching 2 or 3 other people
Got
all at
you.
the same time. It's like okay, still nervous feeling of like how are they gonna, take this?
Of
How are they gonna
course.
look at me? But you got to overcome that stuff and realize that it's hey, you got to do this to become the person that you want to be, right? And this is
Yes.
it's not gonna be perfect the first time around, and that's another thing that I love about looking up to, looking at people that are successful is like they always joke around about like my first time doing this, I was terrible, I was trash, and it's like okay, it gives you some solace to be like okay, they were garbage their first time around, so it's okay. Yeah, it's
I'm gonna
okay.
go
Like
out there.
I
I'm
get
gonna suck.
exactly right, and I'm gonna embrace the suck,
Yes.
and then realize that the second time it's gonna be better than the first time, the 10th time is gonna be better than the second time, and just continue to stick with it and get better from
That's
there,
it,
right?
man.
So
That's
yeah,
it.
yeah, yeah.
And I think that really is it. Like you said, embracing the suck. Like there was a
Yeah.
study that was done actually, and it was a study or some professor in a class or something. They were talking about making pottery, and to half of the group they said like you have to make the perfect pot by the end of the semester. To the other half of the group, they
Mm,
said you have to make 100 pots by the end of the semester. The people that made 100
well,
pots obviously came out with a better pot
best part, yeah.
because they put the practice in. It wasn't like they spent however many months in this semester to put this pot together. It was no, they just got as many out as possible. They got the reps
Mm,
out, even though they sucked. Most of them were probably broken, but the 100th pot for most people tend to be better than the one that it took them so much longer because where they failed, where they messed up, they learned from, and they did something better. They realized, for example,
Mhm.
maybe the clay was too soft, maybe the clay was too hard, and it cracked. Like, do you know what I mean? So it's like
Yeah.
in a sales situation, you can do the same, can't you? You can go out and you can go, okay, so what did I do wrong in this situation? That actually reminded me of what
Yes.
Julian said to me. He said when he was before he came to phone sales, he would write on his card, on a business card, like, what did I do wrong? What could I improve on every time that he didn't make the sale? And then he would read them again. And I was like, that's a really interesting way of getting
Mhm.
back to, okay,
That's
so
dope.
this is what works. This is what doesn't work. Here, I've
Mhm.
seen it work multiple times. Clearly, there's a pattern. Like when
Yes.
I when I maybe when I swear too much with certain type of people,
Yeah.
it doesn't work so well. But do you know what I mean? Like
Mhm.
it's fine. It's picking out the things that do work and picking out the things that don't work,
Yeah.
and just creating your own sort of sales process. I
Young
suppose
person.
within the script
Exactly.
you're allowed. I suppose.
That's such a great metaphor for sales, man. Like as you were describing that pottery example, I was like, man, you're describing sales right now, man. Like those hundred that that repeated process of making those adjustments, man. I'm gonna
Mm,
steal that, Max. I hope you don't mind, man. Like that's
go
actually a
ahead.
really great way to
Go
look at it.
ahead.
Yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
would
Thank
say
you.
credit me, but it's not my story, so I can't say credit me. um, okay, so one of my favorite terms is PIF from
Mm,
phone sales. I never heard of it before until I came across phone sales. A paid in
mm-hmm,
full. So paid in full, for anyone who doesn't know, is just someone paying the full balance of the cost, which in the high ticket sales space is anywhere from 20K up to 150K. I
mm-hmm,
assume higher in some cases.
mm-hmm,
What is an experience when you you're on the call and you're like, "Yeah, they're not even going to put a deposit down, or something.
mm-hmm,
Maybe it's not exactly like this, but like that you didn't even think they were going to buy, and they just come in, they
mm-hmm,
go, okay, get the credit card out, and they go, how much? 150, and they just put the full paid in full
mm-hmm.
down. Like, have you ever had experiences like that?
Yeah, man, I've had quite a few experiences like that. One that I can think of that comes to mind is that's actually my biggest deal. It was a $225,000 deal. Yeah, and it's funny because like I remember telling like one of the guys that I used to work with this story. Like when I did the call, I was on this call and like we were having a great conversation, everything was rolling, but like I was just getting this feeling that this guy wasn't serious. I was getting this feeling like in his responses, I was getting this feeling that like he just wasn't. This wasn't an urgent thing for him. Like for him, like he was very successful. He was making a lot of money. Like without sharing too much details about him, like he had his own business and everything, doing very very well for himself, and like he had this very nonchalant approach
Right.
on the call and made it seem like he was just kind of checking it out, made it seem like this is not urgent for him. So I get to the end of the call and then he was like, okay, cool, man. Like, I'm just going to, you know, just take some time to check it over. I'll get back to you. And because like I'm the kind of person where like I ask certain questions to really understand like, hey, does it make sense to even push?
Of
Does this
course.
even make sense to, does it make more sense to maybe push this to like a 2 or 3 call process, right? And just
Right.
really, you know what I mean? So, and it was one of those things where okay, I finished the call and I was like, okay, you know what? Based on how this call went, I feel like this guy needs a little more time.
Hmm.
This guy hits me back up and it's like, Omar, do we have an option to do the 225, like, so double what we talked about, which ended up being 225,000, right? So he went from being so nonchalant and just giving me no type of buying times whatsoever to being like, you know what, hit me back up after being like, yeah, let's do double what we were talking about. And I was like, what? So, you know what I mean? So it was to this day it just doesn't. And I think like what the only thing that makes sense to me is that like, we still had a great conversation and I wasn't, like I always go off of people's energy, right? And it's
Mm.
like, as no matter how good of a salesperson you are, it's like, yeah, I could have looked at it like, okay, I'm gonna like hard close this guy, I'm
Of
gonna go in here and
course.
be like, okay, he's not giving me the energy, so like I'm gonna, and do all these crazy things to try to get him to make a sale. But it's like consultative selling is more of going back and forth with people and just really helping them along a process
Of
that
course.
they came to you for,
Of
right? So
course.
with him, I was just doing that, but I was like, okay, he's not at the point of making a decision right now.
Mm.
And then for him to hit me back up, a little bit after and be like, okay, Omar, how would it work to do double what we talked about? And I had to just take a second to be like, are we talking about the same thing? Are we talking about the same thing? And he was
You're like,
like,
this
yeah,
is the
man.
right
He's
guy.
like, this is
Yeah.
the right guy, right? And then ended up doing it, man. Ended up, sending over
Right.
$225,000, right? But it was just, that was still the craziest one. That was the craziest one. I've had a bunch of other ones, but that's the craziest one in terms of like how it went, how much he paid, and just yeah, all of that
Mm.
together. So
So
yeah, yeah, yeah.
it was that is like it wasn't just the fact that how like just the money. It was the fact that you were looking at him going, "There's he's probably not going to buy. Let's push it. Let's see
Yeah.
if we can get a deposit after 3 calls or something like that."
Yeah.
Okay, so
Thinking that I needed more time. Yeah, go ahead.
when it comes to that, where you're looking at like going for a hard close, going for a like
Hmm.
pushing for a second call, pushing for a third call, pushing for a deposit, like
Hmm.
how do you personally know which one to go for? Like how do you judge it for your sales calls?
Yeah, I think how I judge that, goes back to just the conversation that we're having and just where I feel this person is, in the buying cycle, right? Because at the end of the day, like you're not going to get anywhere trying to force anybody to do anything that they don't want to do,
Of
right?
course.
Like there's a difference between somebody being on the fence and then having like what we talked about earlier, some fear that is like getting them to be like, like I want to do this, but I just got some fear holding me back. That's a whole different thing. Like if someone's giving me that, I'm going to address that with them and help them move them along on that call, because that's really the thing. It's not a, hey, is this the right time? Do I want this? We've already checked all the boxes that you do want this. This is the right time. This fits all the needs that you have.
Mm,
But it's just that fear or whatever, something else that's holding them back. So let's address that. And then that would be a scenario where it's like, okay, let's go for action. Let's go for a deposit. Let's go for the full
right.
pay.
Interesting.
You know what I mean? But
Interesting.
in scenarios where it's like, like I said, in most cases, I'm good at this. I know that guy I told you about, like that was a, a little bit of a mind blowing experience to have him call me back after and be like, okay, let's do this. But in most cases, I have a good sense. And I think a lot of, seasoned salespeople have a good sense of like, okay, you know what? This person needs a little more seasoning, right? This person needs more information. This may be like a 2 call close or 3 call close because of where they're at in the buying cycle, right? So I think like really listening to people, speaking to them about their needs, and just really seeing what makes most sense for where we're at with this conversation,
Right.
that's gonna kind of
Of
gauge
course.
kind of what to go for, right? But like
Right.
I never force anything that's not there,
Yeah.
right? I'm really looking to see how they're thinking, how they're viewing the situation, what's their perspective on it, and ultimately
Right.
what makes the most sense for what they've been telling me they've been wanting to do, right? So
Right. Okay,
yeah.
so what makes the most sense for them? When you
Yeah.
say that, like what specifics are you looking for? Obviously everyone's gonna be different, but surely there's like a
Hmm.
base of like I don't know, like is
Yeah.
there like questions? Is there an energy thing that you can sense or see
Yeah.
or hear that is like encouraging you to go for a 2 or 3 call close instead?
Yeah, like, and a good way to gauge it is asking questions, obviously earlier on in the process, to understand like, hey, what is it that they're looking for? What's the timeline that they're looking to get this thing accomplished? Or like questions to really understand, like, hey, why did you even come here in the first place? And it goes back to
Right.
that consultative conversation to figure out, this person came to this call for X reason, hoping for X solution, either
Hmm.
now or at some point in the future. So let's just have a real conversation about what that looks like for them. Like, are you in a position right now? Because if you have that conversation early, you can kind of structure what makes most sense for everything else, right? If someone comes into the call and it's just like, yeah, I'm just looking around, I'm just like, wanting to get information.
Hmm.
It's like, okay, cool. Like, Max, I don't think you like, I would hope that you don't just book calls just to gather information all day, right? So like, what are you hoping to do with this information, right?
Hmm.
Oh,
Hmm.
I'm hoping that this information would help me to make a better decision, when it comes to my business, right? Okay, cool. So what is going on with your business that
Right.
you're looking to get some, what I mean? So, and really
Yeah.
just going down the pathway to understand how they're thinking so that you can be like, hey, this is something that they need from what they've shared with me.
Hmm.
What we do actually fits what they need. The timeline of how bad they need this thing fixed is right now, from what I've spoken to them about. Like all of those different types of lines of questioning helps you to understand how to help this person to get
Got you.
ultimately what they
Got
came to
you.
you for, right? So
Yeah.
I wouldn't say it's like it's an exact formula. Like obviously, if you got a good sales structure, it should have a lot of that stuff in it
Of
anyways.
course.
That's
Of course.
what I mean, to help you to have those conversations. But it's really up to you as a salesperson to listen and just do what's best for the prospect, right? Like,
Of course.
and usually what's best for the prospect is moving forward with your services, right? Usually, right? Like if you got the right prospect on the phone in the first place, right?
Of course.
Um,
And that comes down
so
to lead generation, all that type of stuff anyway.
exactly, yeah,
Right, right. Interesting.
yeah.
So then is there a way that like is there something that you look for when you do look to not necessarily hard close, but like, right, we're going for a deposit? Like, is it like someone
Hmm.
who is always they've told you their stories about what they've done in the past and they're just always like fearful, they're always hesitant? Like, is there things that you look
Hmm.
for when you do look to effectively hard close or at least go for deposit?
Yeah, things I would look for, when just really challenging the person to make a decision, to move forward with whether either a deposit or like a paid in full or something like that on the call today, is just really looking for what they said about making this decision, right?
Before you actually got into like high ticket sales and specifically
Hmm.
phone sales,
Hmm.
were you working a 9 to 5?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, before I got into high ticket sales, I was it's funny because like I was working for a company called LA Fitness. Like I was the VP of sales, like managing like
Mhm.
14 clubs at a time, and like it was technically a 9 to 5. I was starting pretty much at 8
Yes.
and work until 6, so pretty much 9
Okay.
to 5, right?
Yeah.
Um but yeah, man, like it's funny because before I got into high ticket sales, and I was working there, like I had tried to start my own business in different forms, a couple different times. So
Mhm.
like being an entrepreneur and just working for myself was a calling for a hot minute, and and finally, like, it's funny. It's COVID is what pushed me out the door to actually make it happen, because COVID
Wow.
like shut down all the gyms. Yeah,
Of course, of course.
yeah, so COVID, like as crazy as it was, like, it was a time in my life where it was like, okay, what I was so used to was no longer an option, right? So I had to
Of
figure it out.
course.
In the time when gym shut down, I had to figure it out, and that's when I really stepped into starting my own business, and then discovered the world of high ticket sales, and was like, wow,
Mhm.
this is pretty much what I've been doing in the in person gym space, but just like
Of
the online
course.
high ticket version. So it was like it was such a perfect fit to come into the high ticket sales space. So yeah, before that, I was doing a 9 to 5, and I would never go back to
Awesome.
to a 9 to 5 after experiencing this type of lifestyle.
Of
No,
course.
yeah,
Of course. So,
yeah.
how did you come across phone sales?
I came across phone sales by it was actually, there's a bunch of different closer groups that are out there, and
Right.
I was in one of the closer groups, and it was I think I'm pretty sure it was a posting about an opportunity, and then I got connected to this guy named Matisse, who was connected to Yovan somehow, and
Right.
then Matisse put me in touch with Yovan, and then we had a conversation. We had a great conversation, and then boom, he instantly on our first conversation was like, "Wow, man, like, yeah, we need closers," but he's like, "Man, I think you can be partner material." And we talked about that from the
Right.
first call, and
Wow.
I was
Wow.
ecstatic. Yeah, I was ecstatic because it was perfect with what I wanted, right? Yeah, I wanted to be a closer. I was already closing on different offers up until that point, but to hear there was an opportunity to use, my leadership management skills and to be part of like scaling something much bigger, like that's
Of course.
exactly where I wanted to be. So when he shared that with me, I
Mhm.
was like, "Man, I'm in." So yeah, man, it was that's how I discovered phone
Oh,
sales.
that's cool, man.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
cool.
yeah.
And what would you say for someone who is living that 9 to 5 model like
Mhm.
you have before? And it's not like you were just an average 9 to 5, like you said, you were in the VP of sales.
Mhm.
But anyone living a 9 to 5 model currently that wants to expand their reality, they want to get something much better. They
Yeah.
want to create a business. They want to work their own schedule.
Mhm.
Like, how can they actually do that to a point where you are, where you now work from home? You earn
Yeah.
probably more money than you ever did before. You own a
100%.
business. You have a team. You
Yeah.
have it all. Like, how does someone get there?
Honestly, man, like, how does someone break out of that 9 to 5? It really starts with realizing that you're not happy in doing what you're doing, right? Like, as much
Mm,
as I had a really great position and I loved my experience in the 14 years that I was there, but for a good while before I finally left, I knew this is not where I wanted to be. Like, I knew that, like,
cool.
being in this restrictive 9 to 5 structure, being in this corporate structure, just being, I can go on for days. I just knew there was so many different elements of it. Even though I was thankful for it, I knew I wasn't happy. And I knew that it wasn't aligned with the kind of life that I wanted to live and the kind of life that I wanted to build. So
Cool.
for people who are looking to escape the 9 to 5, it starts with, hey, and some people love that stuff. Some people love that structure. They love what they're
Mhm,
doing.
mhm,
No
mhm.
offense to it. But for those of you who know that you're wanting more, that you're capable of more, it starts with like facing that reality that, yo, I'm not happy. I'm not, you know, I can't see myself living the rest of my life like this. I can't even see myself living the next year like this. You know what I mean?
Feel it, bro.
Face that reality, and then understand that, okay, it's going to take you doing something different than what you're doing right now, which is
Of
stepping out of your comfort zone and stepping
course.
away from what you've been used to and exploring the possibilities that are out there. And I'll speak specifically to those of you who are in some sort of sales position. The cool part with high ticket sales is that if you got experience in sales in general, you got a foundation that you can step into. And
Mm,
sale, I'll say sales is sales at a high level. It's not, but like I'll just say sales is sales because you have that foundation of communicating with people. That's really what sales is, right? Like
of course.
it's communication. So if you've been in some version of sales, if you are in some version of sales, you got the foundation that opens the door for so many different possibilities out there, including high ticket sales, where you can
Got you.
use what you've been doing that's helped you to perform in your 9 to 5 to now allow you to step into something that gives you so much more freedom, gives you so
Hmm.
much more of an ability to make a
Mm,
lot more money in a lot less time than what you are doing right now. So I would say to those people, face the reality that you want more, and face the reality that what you're doing right now is not giving you what you want. So you're going to have to do something different, which is stepping out of your comfort zone and exploring something like high ticket sales, which I highly recommend.
of course, of course.
Yeah.
I love that. I love that, and that's
Yeah.
that's what I really see is that high ticket sales has given a lot of people a lot of opportunity, has
Yeah.
changed a lot of lives, and I can imagine your life has changed
Big
dramatically as
time, man.
well. Um, Even just being in the vicinity, I say this a lot to all the partners that I speak to as well. Is being in the vicinity of you guys like
Hmm.
inspires me. Being in the
Hmm.
visit, like I'm not here closing. Like we're here helping out with the content, helping drive the content forward, but being in the vicinity, having these conversations helps me. It helps me with my sales. Like sales is a necessary thing, regardless of what anyone's doing.
100%. Yes.
And being around these type of people, being around like imagine having someone like Omar as a mentor, like teaching you the way of sales. I mean, not only is he an expert in the high ticket sales space, but he was a VP in the sales space for 14 years prior. Do you know what I mean? Like
Hmm.
you've got knowledge, you've got experience that some people should be paying for. Yet
Hmm.
coming, this is the thing that blows my mind with phone sales still. You're not coming in to pay for a course, you're coming in for a job.
Hmm.
That's what people don't understand. They're coming in for a job. It's not a course. It's not
Yeah.
a 10K course plus placement. It's a job to make money.
Yeah.
As long as you're good at what you
It gives you all those other things on top of it. Yeah.
do. Exactly, exactly.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
that's the bonus of it. You get the mentorship, you get the
Yeah.
coaching with it. And to me, that's another thing that I love about phone sales. I
Hmm.
love the company. I love the organization. I love the community that is built. I love being in the vicinity of everyone. Um, and no, it's a blessing to chat, Omar. I really want to wrap it up and don't want to take too much more of your time. But if there's someone out there that wants to get into the high ticket sales space,
Hmm.
and they've got basic communication down, like they've done a bit of sales here and there,
Hmm.
how do they get into the high ticket space specifically with phone sales?
Yeah, you just reach out, man. Go to the website, check out the website. It says a lot of, there's a lot of really great information about what we do, information about how to get started, information about how to connect. I would start there. That's the
Right.
easiest place so you can get connected to
Yeah.
someone on the team, and just really explore, and we can have a
Mm.
conversation about, what's possible, have a
Mm.
conversation about where you're at right now. And even if you need help with like making the connections between what you're doing, what you've done, and how it could
Right.
possibly fit into
Of
what we're
course.
doing, I think it starts there. Like it really just starts with having a
Right.
conversation. Yeah.
And how does someone get in, like, to work with you specifically? Like in the
Yeah.
phone sales organization, how do they work with Omar? How do they get in with an individual that they want to get in with? Like, let's say they're watching this podcast and they're like, I want to
Yeah.
work with Omar. I want him to be my mentor. Like, how do they do that?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So even just going to the website, like there's we got a chat option on the website, and even you can go to the website and just be like, I want to talk to Omar, right? Like
Ah, okay,
and
okay,
we'll yeah, because like it's cool because how we have it set up, right? So
yeah,
even just doing something as simple as that, just like going
that's
to the
super cool, man.
website, of course applying. Once you actually get in, you speak to someone
Mm,
like Jeff, for example, our head of HR, like Jeff.
mm,
You do an interview with him, you could just be like, hey, I want to talk to Omar. I want to talk to Jack. I want to talk to Melik. I want to, whichever one of the guys on the team. It's very
mm,
easy for once you actually get in, once you actually start speaking to somebody to be
got
like,
you.
hey, I'm curious in working with so and so. I'm curious in talking to so and so. We're all so connected. It'll be easy for you
Got
to
you.
go there. And we're always on the inside is like, hey, as successful as we are, we're always looking to get connected to people. So like
Of course, you want to find the
you
next big wig.
exactly, right? So like you coming in here with the intention of like wanting to get connected, and especially if it's specifically someone like myself, hey, I'm always looking for
Mm,
amazing people to get connected with, and so is the rest of the team. So
that's it,
it will
man.
certainly be well received if that's
That's it, brother.
your
That's it,
prerogative. Yeah.
brother. Well, Omar, I just want to say I'm blessed to be connected to you, brother. I'm blessed to have the
Blessed
connection
be.
and be able to reach out and
Likewise,
um,
brother.
always, my man. But I appreciate your time. I
Appreciate you
look
too,
forward to this
brother.
going out, and I look forward to the next podcast, my man.